let's get underway. We are now starting a different book. We've moved on from Stephen Covey, and we're going on to Brené Brown, her book Daring Greatly. So let's just see, first of all, let's do a just quick honesty check. Who's had chance to read any of it yet? No from Glenn.
I listened to a few chapters on it on Audible. I've
Well
listened
done.
to about an hour of it, so I don't know actually how many chapters of that is.
That's the only trouble with Audible. You lose track of where you're up to, don't you? Sometimes.
Yeah.
Stan.
Yeah, I listened to mine listen to mine on Audible too.
Cool. Okay. Jane, have you had a chance to listen to it, or what?
I have not. No.
Okay, no problem at all.
I will.
I highly recommend this book. Oh, we've got Yanni joining us as well. I'll just let her into the meeting. And yes, I'm a great fan of Brené Brown. She's written a few books, and if you want to get to know her a little bit better, there is a tremendous interview that she did with Oprah Winfrey, so you can find that on YouTube. Welcome to Yanni. I'm not sure if you're able to speak or not. You're usually driving, but welcome aboard.
Yes, well, it's 1 hour earlier, so that's better.
We weren't sure if you'd be driving or getting kids ready or your child ready for school or whatever, so good to see you. Okay, so yes, Brené Brown has written some tremendous books. She's a researcher, and she started off, well, most of her career she started off as a social worker, and then did a tremendous amount of research into shame and vulnerability, which are interesting topics that are not for the squeamish, I suppose. They could be quite challenging, quite confrontational. But she's written this best-selling sensation, Daring Greatly: How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead. So there's some great tips for both for life and for business on vulnerability and what that actually means. So let's start with her introduction, and she caught my attention straight away because I had actually used this very same quote at the start of my book, the one that I wrote called If Life's Worth Doing, It's Worth Doing Well, as one of my favorite speeches. It's the quote of the Roosevelt speech, from where he made a speech called Citizenship in a Republic at the Sorbonne in the university in Paris in France in 1910. And I'll just read this quote because I think this really sets the scene for the whole book. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. And that's where the title Daring Greatly has come from that tremendous speech. So it really does set the scene for the book. What it means, she says, what it means to dare greatly is to put yourself out there, to be the person in the arena. And I'll change that to person because obviously it was written in 1910, so it was all about men. And we now live in an equal opportunity world. So it should have been, of course, person, to be politically correct. If the person in the arena, so you can go back and substitute that and everyone will be happy. So the person of whatever gender, whichever of the however many genders we have these days, I lose track. But anyway, that's an aside. So, so it's putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. So whenever you put yourself into the arena of life or whatever it is that you're tackling, whenever you put yourself under the spotlight, you risk failure, you risk embarrassment, you risk humiliation perhaps. And so that's the starting point of it all, is that in order to really achieve things in life, there isn't much choice. You have to put yourself out there. You have to risk failing if you ever want to succeed at anything. So that's the research that she's that's led her to this point, is to really focus in on what does vulnerability actually mean. And she says vulnerability is not knowing victory or defeat. It's understanding the necessity of both. It's engaging. It's being all in. If you're not willing to be all in and put yourself out there, then yeah, you'll be safe and cocooned, but you may never achieve very much. It's and she goes on to talk about this as we go into the next chapter, but things like, if you want to be loved, you have to risk not being loved. You know, if you want to succeed at something, you have to risk failing at it as well. So it's quite powerful. And she says, join me as we explore the answers to these questions. Good questions to ask. What drives our fear of being vulnerable? How are we protecting ourselves from vulnerability? What price are we paying when we shut down and disengage? How do we own and engage with vulnerability so we can start transforming the way we live, love, parent, and lead? Interesting start. Hey, anyone got any comments or thoughts on that so far? No takers?
I think just on the first question about, well, what springs to mind is the fear of letting people in.
Yeah. Yep.
Which
And
covers
why
a whole
is that
lot.
important to you, Glenn?
Hmm?
Why is that important to you? What made that stand out for you?
I suppose that's where I came from years ago. Was yeah, just the way that I was brought up. I suppose it was a very sort of private sort of family. Big generation gap between my parents and me, and you know, you were seen and not heard, and you know, so you didn't really get on with things, and yeah, there's a lot actually there. It's like, you know, just carry on and don't rock the boat. You'll be fine. Everything will be okay. But until you realise that it's not the way that it works, quite some time later, then yeah, you've got to be vulnerable to get ahead. You've got to put yourself out there.
That's definitely the English parenting style, wasn't it? To children should be seen and not heard.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have Zoom meetings where we're heard and not seen.
That's called NBN meetings because it's rubbish.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that. That's good. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Anyone? Yeah, Jane.
Yeah, you know, when I think about what drives our fear of being vulnerable, I can't help but think about how if you were to go into a nursery school and ask a bunch of kids, okay, which one of you is the fastest runner? Which one of you can do 10 jumping jacks in 5 seconds? Which, you know, all of the kind of, and they all will right up, me. And then when you get to about first grade, everybody kind of stands back when asked the question, you know, who's the fastest? Because, you know, what happens is the kids start to really see, they size each other up, and there's a determination that gets made. And what goes along with that is the I'm less than you, you know, and so it's like, so yeah, from such a young age, it's who the heck wants to be vulnerable? And, you know, because it was just, you know, you're not getting chosen in volleyball or, you know, the list goes on when you're a kid, and just gets to be tough. And then you put that together with the seen and not heard. And by the way, guys, you know, big guys don't cry and big girls don't cry either. And, you know, there's no crying in baseball and what have you. So yeah, it just all like just comes right into view as to how we're supposed to operate. And, you know, we wonder why we're sometimes human pretzels, not feeling, you know?
Yeah, great share, Jane. That's one of the key points I think about why this book resonates with so many people, is because it's something we've all experienced. Through the childhood years, you start out being, as she calls it, perfect or bulletproof in your own mind, and then you get that knocked out of you very quickly in the school system, don't you? And being told, as Glenn said, you know, be seen and not heard. I love this paragraph here where she says, when we spend our lives waiting until we're perfect or bulletproof before we walk into the arena, we ultimately sacrifice relationships and opportunities that may not be recoverable. We squander our precious time and we turn our backs on our gifts, those unique contributions that only we can make. So it does knock it out of us, doesn't it? That the school system, when you have a few setbacks, or you're embarrassed because, you know, the other kids make fun of you, or the teacher knocks back what you've proposed, it then can make you retreat back into your shell and think, well, I'm not going to risk standing out again. I'll just be quiet. You know, I don't want that embarrassment again. So I'll keep my unique gifts to myself. We don't just think of them as unique gifts at the time, but later on we may realize that that's the case, that we have had some unique gifts that we've not really fully explored. I mean, we're all great singers in the shower, aren't we? And yet, you know, like public speaking is one of those things that freaks a lot of people out. Some people would rather be dead than speak in public. There's just that fear of embarrassment or humiliation. Fiona, you look like you're wanting to say something.
Yeah, I think it is the fear of rejection or fear of saying the wrong thing. I know often in a meeting, you know, you're always a bit reserved, going, oh, should I say something or shouldn't I? What happens if people don't agree with my opinion or not? So sometimes you don't say anything just because of that fear. But I don't know, when I'm in a broker meeting now, I try to speak up. And I think I come across something a couple of years ago. I don't know what it was. Someone, I think, did a reading, or someone said something and said that people do want to hear what you have to say, and it's important that you do speak up, because what you have to offer might be valuable, or someone else hasn't had the courage to speak up. So please speak up. Someone, I don't know, I was speaking to someone about it, and then so since that was said, and I would love to know if I could remember where, it's made me go, you know what, I'm going to take that leap, and if I want to speak up, I will. But yeah, your heart still pumps and flutters, going, oh, you know, have I said the right thing? Have I offended anyone? Or do people not agree or think I'm silly? So
yeah, there's a few good points you've made there, because we're treading on eggshells a lot of the time these days, aren't we, with political correctness and so on. And you know, I'm not very good at treading on eggshells, so I just stamp on them, as you probably noticed. But yes, we do. You do still get that moment, don't you, when your heart's going and you think, oh, should I say something? And what if people think that what I've just said was stupid or not correct? It's definitely true, especially in business circles. And well, I love how Richard Branson said that he likes to be the dumbest person in the room. He likes to surround himself with smart people. So imagine you're in that situation. You must then feel really intimidated at opening up your mouth and realizing that everyone in the room is smarter than you. So you might say something that they all think is really stupid. But that was a sign of great leadership, wasn't it? That he'd take that step. So it's a bit like a muscle, I think. The more you exercise it, the more you risk being vulnerable, the more you're willing to sort of stand out and speak your mind, the better you get at it, the easier it becomes, the less daunting it seems. So
you don't know what opportunities arise because you're willing to put yourself out there.
Yeah, for sure. She says perfect and bulletproof is seductive, but they don't exist in the human experience. None of us are perfect, and none of us are bulletproof. You know, we all feel it when someone criticizes us or disagrees with our opinion. But then sometimes they might have more information than us, and they give us a new insight, so it can be useful. But we have to dare to show up and let ourselves be seen. This is what she says. This is vulnerability. This is daring greatly. So that, if you like, is the definition, the starting point of it all. And then she goes on to her introductions. So, My Adventures in the Arena, it's called. And she starts off with a conversation with her therapist, which is quite interesting. And that's being vulnerable, isn't it? You know, you've got the author of the book about vulnerability admitting right up front that they're having a conversation with their therapist. And I love that about Brené. When she talks, she's very engaging. And as you may agree with me, I don't know, you've just been listening to the audio, a couple of you, I find that she's got a great sense of humor, and she's very sort of self-deprecating in her humor. And I love her real life examples that she throws in, where she does some pretty silly things, or she's made some quite big boo-boos, you know, over the years, and she just owns up to it and admits it. And I think sometimes by being vulnerable like that, you strip away the sort of this myth of celebrity, that celebrities are not supposed to make mistakes. They're supposed to be perfect beings, you know, and they're not. They're all human, and they all stuff things up just the same as we all do. And she's very good at that. And I think that's what's made her so endearing in this arena. So she talks about how she's saying that vulnerability is excruciating, and her therapist is going, it's exquisite. She said, no, I said excruciating. No, exquisite. And she goes on to say that when she feels that she's being vulnerable, she feels like punching someone in the face. And the therapist says, like, really? Do you do that? Well, of course not. No, but what do I do instead? I clean the house, eat peanut butter, blame people, make everything around me perfect, control whatever I can, whatever's not nailed down. I love that. And when do you feel the most vulnerable? When I'm in fear. And when I think about how much I love my kids and a husband, and how my life would be if something ever happened to them. So this is something she explores quite a bit in her books, is this this fear of a terrible event happening to her family. You know, there's one of the audios where she talks about seeing a car accident. You know, like, you've got to be very careful with this stuff too, because you can attract these things, you know, the more you focus on them. But she says that she feels scared when things feel too good. Has anyone had that experience? And when it feels like your life is going so well, surely something's going to stuff up. Anyone ever had that? I know.
Very recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of months ago, and I actually spoke to my therapist and said, "This is too good. Things are going really, really well at the moment, and something or someone is going to rock the boat." But understanding that's going to happen, so you're not sort of prepared for it, but when it does come around, you go, "Yeah, I thought this is going to happen," and it's just a matter of circumstances. And that's sort of quite jokingly say with him, all, you know, we've got this bit of banter going on over the years, that, you know, this too shall pass. So it'll come back again. Yeah. And it's
a normal human reaction that you've revealed there, Glenn, that we do feel that sometimes things are too good, and it's part of our putting our suit of armor on. And she talks about that in this chapter as well. But wearing a suit of armor is that just in case things all fall apart, we haven't let ourselves get our expectations too high. You know, we haven't allowed ourselves to be seduced by the magic of this, you know, everything going so well. So we don't get too disappointed or too hurt. We start to prepare ourselves mentally for when it all goes wrong. It's a bit sad, that, isn't it? But it's something that we do often do. Yeah. We find ourselves as humans, because we've been disappointed or hurt or let down in the past in our lives at some point, we sort of feel, I can't sit here with all this good stuff going on, because it doesn't, in some way underlying that is, and she talks about this in her Oprah interview, the underlying theme to that is, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve this.
Yeah. At the same time, you know, many years ago when things are going really, really good, and you do get yourself prepared for it, as you say, something's going to go wrong somewhere soon. Something's going to rock the boat, and you're going to have that downer, and you get prepared for it. And as you said, you know, you're getting prepared for it. It's going to attract it. Whereas now, I just go, look, yeah, it's not going to continue like this forever and a day, but let's enjoy the moment while it's still here at the moment. Hey, and you know, do as much as you can while you're in that sort of mood and while you're in that sort of state of bliss, I suppose. I was floating. It was just like, this is just too good. Things are going so well. It's kind of, yeah, where's the cliff? No, let's not worry about that. Let's just enjoy the moment. And that extends that moment, those moments, because you don't put on the, you know, the suit of armor's there, as you say, but you don't put it on just yet, like I used to.
Well, that's progress, isn't it? But it's still there in the room, ready to grab if you need it. Yeah, I love this. This fits in so well with another book that we'll look at it in due course, and that's The Power of Now. So Eckhart Tolle, talking about how you become the observer of your mind, and you realize you are not your mind. Your mind is throwing these things up at you. Oh, watch out, you know, things can't be this good, or, you know, you don't deserve it. Realize that that's just a tape that's running. That's just, you know, a message that's playing from your brain that's preparing you for disappointment. But that doesn't have to be the case. That doesn't have to be real. What if things not only stayed magical, but got even better? Wouldn't that be great? And why shouldn't they? Why don't we? You know, what we do deserve it, don't we?
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, if you can actually feel, yes, I am worthy, and yes, I do deserve this, things can continue to get even better than they are now. And yet there's that little part of us, that nagging part that goes, oh, it's all going to go wrong.
It's all going to go wrong. Those numbers are going to come up next week. I'm going to have to make that decision now on how much money I want to win.
So it's thinking and feeling. There's a difference, isn't there? But our thoughts lead to changing our feelings. So recognizing that those are thoughts that come along, but they're not necessarily valid. They may just be the thoughts that our ego puts up to protect us from disaster and from setbacks and from disappointment. So in this introduction, Brené goes on to talk about, she's a 5th generation Texan with a family motto of lock and load. I love that. You know, that's a tough family. That's, you know, you don't show your emotion. You don't risk being vulnerable. You just toughen up, princess, you know. So it's so interesting how our upbringings can shape that sort of, you know, how, to what extent we wear a suit of armor, or whether our family, our generational pain is there, or whether our family have sort of indoctrinated us with, no, you have to be tough, you have to stand up against disappointments, and don't show, you know, like Jane said, don't cry, be a big boy, be a big girl, you put your big girl pants on, you know, and all this stuff. We are greatly affected to start with by that upbringing, by that influence and example from our parents or our teachers or our early mentors, role models.
It's everything around you. Society in a whole, newspaper, news, is, you know, radio news, the whole thing. It's what you take in, and how it's, yeah, definitely. But just on that, it's quite interesting, you know, say the way that you're brought up and that sort of thing. So yeah, obviously I've got an older brother and a younger sister, for those that don't know me, and you know, we were brought up exactly the same way. And years down the track, when we sort of went our own way and started doing our own things, Mum sort of, I think Mum more than anything went, hang on, this is not the way I brought these kids up. How come you're out there doing this wild stuff? You know, me moving to England, my brother going off doing what he did, and my sister moving to the US for a while. And she went, "Oh, you know, what happened there?" You know, but it was like, it was because they'd never done that sort of thing, and it was unusual for them. So then when we came back from England, you know, Mum went, "Well, you know, why aren't you going to do it?" So, well, what do I have here apart from family? It was an experience, and here I am back again. And then she could understand why we did, the three of us did what we did. You know, get out and do that. Just it wasn't the norm for her family to do that. Then was, you know, dealing with her expectations after that. Yeah,
That's an
not so
excellent point, Glenn. Thanks for bringing that up, because one of the things you might have noticed in the title or the subtitle of the book, as I read out, was that the courage to be vulnerable transforms the way we live, love, parent, and lead. So there's quite a few good parental examples here of A, don't try and live your life vicariously through your children, and B is to give them the freedom to be themselves, you know, to encourage them. Don't put your limitations onto them. If you've been afraid to do something, you're afraid to be vulnerable enough to go out and do something that you think is intimidating or scary, if they're game enough to go and do it, why should your limitation become their limitation? It's an interesting point, isn't it? So she talks about her different stages of growing up. So over time, I tried everything from being the good girl with my perform perfect please routine to clove smoking poet, angry activist, corporate climber, and out of control party girl. I love that. At first glance, these may seem like reasonable, if not predictable, developmental stages, but they were more than that for me. All of my stages were different suits of armor that kept me from becoming too engaged and too vulnerable. Each strategy was built on the same premise: keep everyone at a safe distance and always have an exit strategy. Anyone relate to that? Keep everyone at a safe distance. Okay. But luckily, along with her fear of vulnerability, she also inherited a huge heart and ready empathy. So then she did some waiting on tables and bartending, as probably most of us have done at some point, and or some sort of service role, and then left her job to go and become a social worker. And then along the way discovered that the fascination that she had with people and trying to start off as a social worker, trying to fix everyone's problems, and realized that that doesn't always work. But she found that her real passion was research, and, you know, drawing conclusions from interviews with people, thousands and thousands of people, to formulate her thesis, and then ultimately these books that she's written. She said, connection is why we're here. We are hardwired to connect with others. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives, and without it, there is suffering. That's a powerful statement, isn't it? Anyone, any thoughts on that? Without connection, there is suffering.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because it's one thing to say, oh, well, you know, we're social beings and we need to connect, we need community and belonging, but then to take it to the next step of reality of, yeah, and if we don't, there's suffering. It's like, whoa, that's like right between the eyes.
It sure is, and it does shed some light on some of the problems that we have already experienced and will continue to experience as a knock-on effect from the lockdowns of the COVID-19 epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of isolation caused, and when you add to that and we'll come to this in this next chapter, but the effects of things like social media and this idea of having to be this bulletproof perfect person who is competing with everybody else to achieve these standards
Mm-hmm.
that are probably in most cases quite unrealistic. That puts a lot of pressure on people, and then when they haven't got connection to discuss these things, to bounce, how do I feel about this, off somebody that cares about them, this can be really even more isolating and lead to even more mental illness, depression, anxiety, all those sorts of things that are coming up quite a lot.
With connections, so I did 27 years of sitting behind a desk in a corporate world with sort of all sorts of people, and you can still be alone and suffer, but still have connections, but there's sort of like a professional connection. It then becomes, when you are vulnerable and you talk to people about, you know, what you're going through, where you're at, why you want to change your roles, you know, what's going on in your rest of your life and that sort of stuff, that's when the real connection happens. I've seen a lot through COVID where people jumped onto Zoom meetings, and to be 30, 40 people on a Zoom meeting. And it, you know, it does be the analogy of the Muppet Show, you know, you just got all these people lined up, and it's just like, yeah, they're all actually real people. And then post-COVID, when you get to meet these people face to face, and you find out the person you've been talking to is only like 4'11", and you think they're 6'2", and vice versa. And then you get to meet the real person, and you have coffee with them, and it's different. So yeah, you can have a connection. You know, the people that I've met and knew through the corporate world, thousands of people around the globe, but there's a select few that I still keep in touch with, either in Perth, in the US, in Canada, in Europe, in Asia, wherever. And they are the proper connections. And I can pick up a phone and talk to these guys that I haven't spoken to in years, and we know where we're at straight away. Okay, the power of social media does a bit of that, but some of them are not on it. But it is that real close connection, because at some point someone shared something and there's some vulnerability shared there, and it just makes it so much different, a different sort of connection completely.
Are you sure you haven't read this book, Glenn?
I saw the title and I thought, no, I haven't.
Segue into what's coming up.
I haven't read it at all. No.
It's you're spot on there.
No, I think didn't she dedicate the book to Glenn?
Hang on, I'm just on the phone. Hang on.
Okay, so there was another book that she wrote, and I hadn't realized the order of them, so I made a mistake there, but otherwise I would have probably started with the other one. But she wrote another book called The Gifts of Imperfection, which is also extremely good. And in this, she defined, and so she's mentioning this in this introduction, in The Gifts of Imperfection, I defined 10 guideposts for wholehearted living. So where does this word wholehearted come from? Well, she says, what do the people who are the most resilient to shame, who believe in their worthiness? I call these people the wholehearted. What do they have in common? So she came up with some guideposts for wholehearted living, which points to work to cultivate, what they work to cultivate and what they work to let go of. So I'll just run through these 10 points because I think these are great points. Number one, cultivating authenticity means letting go of what people think. So those are the two sides to the, you know, what you want to work to cultivate and what you want to work to let go of. So work to cultivate authenticity and work to let go of what people think. Number two, cultivating self-compassion. And the flip side of that, letting go of perfectionism. Fiona. I only mention that because Fiona describes herself as a perfectionist yesterday, and I wouldn't mean to single you out there, Fiona. We can all be perfectionists at times. Number three, cultivating a resilient spirit, letting go of numbness and powerlessness. Number four, cultivating gratitude and joy. How many of these books talk about gratitude? Such a powerful one. And letting go of scarcity and fear of the dark. Fear of the dark. I think that's not just, you know, bedtime as a child. It's also the dark as a sort of, you know, metaphor, if you like. Maybe not. Number five, cultivating intuition and trusting faith. Letting go of the need for certainty. That need for certainty. This is part of being out in the arena, isn't it? Letting go of the need for certainty. Cultivating creativity, number 6. Letting go of comparison. So this thing of comparing yourself with everybody else, dangerous world. Number 7, cultivating play and rest. Well, we talked about that with sharpening the saw in Stephen Covey book, resting yourself to make yourself more resilient. Letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth. I'm just reading another book at the moment, which is Thrive by Arianna, I think, Huffington. And she talks a lot about this, that how our society has viewed being exhausted as a symbol of, I must be doing really well in life, because I'm absolutely knackered doing this job that I'm doing. I'm flogging myself into the ground. How good am I? Yeah, makes sense of that one. Number 8, cultivating calm and stillness. Letting go of anxiety as a lifestyle. Number 9, cultivating meaningful work. Letting go of self-doubt and supposed to. Another word for supposed to is should. That big word should. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. Who says? Number 10, cultivating laughter, song, and dance. Letting go of being cool and always in control. Any of those resonate with people?
All of the above.
That you're willing to put yourself out there in the arena and admit to? All of the above. Nice one, Glenn.
All of the above. The last one so much about I should be doing something else. But why? It's still going to be there. I'll catch up with it. I'll catch up with it. It's not going to go away.
Isn't that something that society has cultivated in us? This guilt of, we were talking about this recently, when Joe's father was sick in hospital, how she felt guilty taking time off work to go and visit her father in hospital. When we were talking about the comparison with the Balinese culture, for instance, where family is everything. And if the family member's sick, and you could say the same with the indigenous culture in Australia, if family needs you, you're there. Stuff work, that'll be there tomorrow, or somebody else will do it. Your family is the most important thing. Your health is the most important thing. So they put those things first. In our society, we've got that the wrong way around, haven't we? It's all about the work and the performance and the results and the figures.
In the last sort of, let's say professional role, but role that I had, struggled to work with that because you've got, it was with an Indigenous group, traditional owner group here in Perth, and for them, family's everything. They drop everything. It's like pretty much like the Balinese. They just run and go, and don't always remember that. Hang on a minute. And I struggled with it because I was managing a team, and the guys were taking off. And at the same time, you've got to understand that they've got to go and spend time with their family. And I would do the same thing. When my dad was cook or whatever else, or someone's ill, you go. But at the same time, then you've got policies within the workplace that says, but they've only got so many days leave, they can only do this and they're going to do that, and still obviously the job's got to get done. So you've got to, and it used to, that's why I don't work there anymore. But, yeah, it was crazy trying to juggle the two sides of things. But
yeah, because when you're in a leadership or management role, it doesn't really allow for that, does it? It's, well, the work has to, that's what you're there for, is to do the work to get the job done. And can you really accept people's problems impacting on the business? But as a new age leader, we have to take account of the fact that our people are our most productive asset. If their life is torn apart by something that's going on privately, that's going to affect their work performance anyway. So it's better that they get the support they need and deal with whatever they've got to deal with. But somebody's got to do the job. So maybe that means you have to bring in somebody else, or these are the economic realities of life as well. So we are playing that juggling game all the time. And if you're in a small business with a small team, if you've got 50 people in your team and you lose one, it's not a big deal. But if you've got 5 people in your team or 3 people in your team and one of them's not there, that's a lot of extra load for the ones who are left to try and cover. The big challenge. So wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I'm imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging. So we have to experience both. That's part of the magic of being human. We have to, this definition is based on these fundamental ideals that love and belonging are irreducible needs of all men, women, and children. And there's a number of other beliefs there. But the main concern of wholehearted men and women is living a life defined by courage, compassion, and connection. And that vulnerability is the core, the heart, the center of meaningful human experiences. So we have to have this tension. Seth Godin talks a lot about this tension, the tension of this may work and this might not work. When you're putting your work out there, your art, your ideas, your comments in a board meeting, at a broker's meeting, whatever it is, you have to sort of accept that this may be profound and successful and everyone thinks I'm wonderful for saying this, or they might think I'm an idiot. You have to live with that tension that both of those could be true and embrace that. You can't control other people's reactions and their judgments. So why do we fear them? Because underneath we wonder, am I not good enough? You have to have the willingness to fail, because that's where you grow. That's where you succeed. When failure is not an option, we can forget about learning, creativity, and innovation. If we allow ourselves to be governed by that fear of failure, then we won't risk anymore. We won't try to be creative. We won't try to speak up because we'll be too worried about the negative aspects. So she concludes that introduction by saying, what we know matters, but who we are matters more. Any other points from that introduction that anyone wanted to highlight? Otherwise, we'll go on to chapter 1, Scarcity.
Just something that springs to mind for me.
Yep.
And what Fiona was saying earlier as well, you know, like talking up in a broker's meeting, or you're talking up in a management meeting, as I used to go to. I quickly learned to sort of preface it with, well, in my opinion, or in let me know if, you know, what about this sort of thing, rather than just, because I dealt with people over the years that just like it was their way or the highway, and that's the way they wanted to run things. I went into a meeting one day with some pretty high powered GMs and MDs in the mining group, and I just had a horrible morning, and I went, I don't really care what I say or how it gets delivered today. And I went across and just spoke my mind on what they were doing and where it was coming across. And I looked across at my manager and she was sweating. And I walked out and I said, was that all right? She went, you should have done that a long time ago. She said, because they needed someone at your level to speak up and say what was going wrong and call them out on it. Well done. And yeah, I still managed to keep my job for a few years after that, so it wasn't so bad. You know, you just got to be who you are. One of my managers years ago said, look, just write an email as if it's you. Don't try and to pretend to be someone else, and just show your vulnerability. Just sign it off with cheers or thanks or whatever. Doesn't matter who you're sending it to. They know who they're dealing with. So it helps. That's brilliant, Glenn. That's, yeah, authenticity is what Brené talks about is one of the examples of wholehearted living. The willingness to be yourself and feel that self-worth that, in my opinion, does matter. And okay, I might not have all the facts, so somebody, and that's where you can soften it. I think it might have been How to Win Friends and Influence People. You can soften it with a preface it with something like, oh, I may not have all the facts, or look, I may not be absolutely right here, but based on what I know, this is what I think. So you don't have to come across as being you know, an arrogant know-all or somebody that's trying to put everyone else down, or rock the system too much. But you can still get your point of view across, and you can still do it from
a feeling, a sense of self-worth, and that my opinion matters. And why shouldn't I be heard? Why shouldn't I speak up? I have as much right as anyone else to speak up, to have an opinion. So that's a great example. Thanks, Glenn. So anyone else from introduction, or we'll go to the next chapter? Anything leaping out at you? No? All right. So chapter 1, just conscious of time, so we'll get moving on this one. Chapter 1, scarcity. This looks inside our culture of never enough. Where does this I'm not enough or never enough come from? And she says, one thing we have in common is that we're sick of feeling afraid. We want to dare greatly. We're tired of the national conversation centering on what should we fear and who should we blame. We all want to be brave. I think it was Glenn pointed out, you know, what's on the media, what's going on in the world around us, and our news stations bombarding us with things to be afraid of. And, you know, the things that might happen. We might be about to have a global downturn. We might be about to have a world war. We might be about to have a plague or a famine or a flood or a fire or whatever, you know, all these things that are constantly bombarding us. And what if we don't have any of that? You know, what if we actually have a great life and it all goes well? Should we sit there being afraid of everything? It's not.
You're going to start me off in a minute. Fiona, what's the average mortgage in Australia at the moment? Is it about 500,000? Because the news are reporting on, you know, your average mortgage is $750,000. Well, I don't think so. But there's just scaremongering. What I'm getting to is this scaremongering.
Wouldn't be in WA.
Yeah.
Overseas. My average loan size is about 400,000.
Yeah. So
in WA, but it varies between suburbs or where you're at. I was actually having this discussion yesterday because at the moment I'm doing a lot of real small loans. But in WA it's not that high.
Yeah. So my point is that they're advertised that they're reporting on the radio when the Reserve Bank raises the rate that it puts X amount of dollars on the average $750,000 mortgage. But people don't hear that. They hear the figure up front of how much it's going to cost them a month. And then it starts all this, it just starts the thing off. So you just hit a nerve there, Tony, that's all.
Well, that's what we're all about, Glenn. We're here to hit nerves. We're here to get us all thinking and challenging our little brains and growing into big brains.
It annoys me. I turn the radio off when the news comes on the way home.
Cool. So she goes on to talk about looking at narcissism through the lens of vulnerability. There's this thing now that we see all these people who are apparently egotistical, that, you know, kids are narcissists, bosses are narcissists, people on social media are narcissists. So the term has been bandied about without the traditional sort of psychiatric evaluation of that term. So she said, there's this thing about blaming everybody and blaming people. So she says, let's talk about understanding the root cause so we can address the problems. We need to understand these trends and influences, but I find it far more helpful and even transformative in many instances to look at the patterns of behavior through the lens of vulnerability. For example, when I look at narcissism through the vulnerability lens, I see the shame-based fear of being ordinary. I see the fear of never feeling extraordinary enough to be noticed, to be lovable, to belong, or to cultivate a sense of purpose. So there's a lot of people out there who we might think are arrogant or overbearing or opinionated. And very often that's just their suit of armor for the fact that underneath it all, they're scared shitless. You know, did I say that out loud on a call? I think I did. Yes. A lot of them are putting somebody else down because it makes them feel better. It diverts attention away from their own lack of self-worth or their own low self-esteem, their own little voice going, are you sure you're good enough? Maybe you're not. I see the cultural messaging everywhere that says that an ordinary life is a meaningless life. Wow. What's wrong with being ordinary? She says, I see how kids that grow up on a steady diet of reality television, celebrity culture, and unsupervised social media can absorb this messaging and develop a completely skewed sense of the world. I am only as good as the number of likes I get on Facebook or Instagram. Wow. Have you ever put a post out on social media that you think's really good and no one comments on it? It's just crickets. You're like, why? None of you have ever had that, have you?
But when you get to understand the algorithm, and no one's looking at it, you just go, that's why.
Yeah.
Or they deem it not to be, I don't know, yeah, it doesn't fit in with the way that, you know, their format or whatever else. Then you go, yeah, whatever. Have you watched Mirror Mirror, the Todd Sampson
No.
doco? Worthwhile. It's in 2 parts. It's called Love and Hate, and it's about social media and how it manipulates certain aspects of people's lives. Very, very good.
Something that we've really got to have more discussion about, because I do wonder about the impact this is going to have on our young people going forwards. You know, like I grew up in a world where we didn't have social media, as many of us did, and the pressure that it brings to bear on young people now. You go outside without your phone, you feel naked, don't you?
I was actually having this discussion with some people yesterday with our children. I actually feel sorry for our children today with social media, because there's so much pressure. I even remember my son, he put a post up on Instagram, and he obviously was monitoring how many likes he got on it. And because he didn't get so many likes, he quickly deleted it, because he's fear that, they hadn't liked it enough, or, you know, or people might not like what I had posted. And I said, mate, that's not how you judge something. But I think what also happens with social media is that the kids are always seeing that, what other people are doing, and they haven't been invited, or they're missed out. And in the old days, that wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have even known that one of their friends were out doing something else. And it puts a lot of pressure on them. And then they're thinking that they're not good enough because they hadn't been invited. And they're just constantly addicted to these devices. And I think it's going to have a problem with mental health.
Yeah.
So, there was I don't know if you've heard of this new app, which I actually think is really good. Madison, my daughter, has shown me. It's called Be Real. And so now, instead of everything being posed, you just get a notification on your phone saying you have to be real. You need to do a post now of exactly what you're doing at this moment in time, which is great. So now they're actually getting, and Madison is so excited with it. The other day I was cooking. This is where I found out. I was cooking at the bench. She's like, "Mum, be real," and I'm like, "What?" And so then she's got this horrible photo of me. But it was like, and so it takes a photo of her, and then what's happening in the background. And I actually think that's really good, because it's about being real in the moment. What are you actually doing? It's not always about only posting the good things that happen in life. And so she started showing me some other posts, what other friends have done. It might be that they're just cooking dinner, or one was going into the doctor's surgery and stuff like that. And I do actually think that's quite a good app, actually.
Now, who's ever said, be honest here, I don't want that photo posting on Facebook?
But always.
That makes me look hugely overweight, or, you know, I've got a horrible expression on my face, or I look stupid in that picture. And yet that's just real life, isn't it? That's just, we all look overweight or stupid or have a silly expression at some point. No, Joe says it's just the camera angles and the lighting.
The camera doesn't work in your favour sometimes.
She's shouting that in the background from the kitchen. Okay.
Be real, Joe.
Yeah, be real, Joe. Be real. So let's move on from that. Something can always be learned when we consider these questions. 1, what are the messages and expectations that define our culture, and how does culture influence our behaviors? 2, how are our struggles and behaviors related to protecting ourselves? And 3, how are our behaviors, thoughts, and emotions related to vulnerability and the need for a strong sense of worthiness? Everything we've just been talking about, that, you know, we allow ourselves to be impacted by, oh, what are people going to think? How are they going to judge me? You know, does it matter? Does it really matter what other people think if they see a picture of you with a silly expression on your face? You know, it's just a moment. And when she was doing interviewing, she found that she really, people opened up to her when she asked them to complete this phrase, never blank enough. When do you feel never whatever enough? And the word, and asked them to fill in the missing word. And some of the words that were put in were never good enough, never perfect enough, never thin enough, never powerful enough, never successful enough, never smart enough, never certain enough, never safe enough, never extraordinary enough. And that's just a few of the many examples that she's put up. So
was this the chapter, Tony, because I'm just trying to remember what I listened to because I don't have the book.
Yep.
Where I thought it was the scarcity, whereas we wake up every morning and what's the first thought we thought? I haven't had enough sleep.
You've just gone perfectly into the very next paragraph. Well done.
We're starting off with a negative thought and that we don't have enough right from the first time we wake up.
Yes, and it's from somebody in your area. The lady who's written this book is called Lynn Twist. Her book is called The Soul of Money. It's all about money, but it's all about our relationship to it. So in this, she refers to scarcity as the great lie, and exactly what you've just said, Fiona. She goes, for me and for many of us, our first waking thought of the day is, I didn't get enough sleep. The next one is, I don't have enough time. Whether true or not, that thought of not enough occurs to us automatically before we even think to question or examine it. We spend most of the hours and days of our lives hearing, explaining, complaining, or worrying about what we don't have enough of. Before we even sit up in bed, before our feet touch the floor, we're already inadequate, already behind, already losing, already lacking something. And by the time we go to bed at night, our minds are racing with a litany of what we didn't get or didn't get done that day. We go to sleep burdened by those thoughts and wake up to that reverie of lack. This internal condition of scarcity, this mindset of scarcity, lives at the very heart of our jealousies, our greed, our prejudice, and our arguments with life. How powerful is that? I'll let that sink in for a moment. That we're living in a world of not enough. Too easy, isn't it? Too easy to fall under that spell. We're often comparing our lives, our marriages, our families, and our communities to unattainable, media-driven visions of perfection. We compare ourselves and our lives to a memory that nostalgia has so completely edited that it never really existed. Rose-tinted glasses. You know, we think back to the good old days. Oh, everything was perfect back in those days. Back in my day. Yep. So what she's saying is that there's enough of us struggling with the issue of worthiness that it's shaping the culture that we're all experiencing. So, and she said, when you think about it, over the past decade, I've witnessed major shifts in the zeitgeist of our country, you know, the sort of the thoughts of the times. I've seen it in the data, and honestly, I've seen it in the faces of the people I meet, interview, and talk to. The world has never been an easy place, but the past decade has been traumatic for so many people that it's made changes in our culture. What we were talking about before about the news and media. From 9/11, multiple wars, and the recession, to catastrophic natural disasters and the increase in random violence and school shootings, we've survived and are surviving events that have torn at our sense of safety with such force that we've experienced them as trauma, even if we weren't directly involved. Now, that's another very powerful statement. That's the impact of all this stuff that we see on television every day, on the news. Whether we want to look at it or not, it somehow filters through, or somebody tells you about it, or, yeah, you know, you can't even say, I'm not watching the news because I don't want to hear about all the bad stuff that's going on in the world, because someone will tell you anyway. Did you hear about this? Oh, it's the topic of conversation, isn't it? And what that leads to, worrying about scarcity, is our culture's version of post-traumatic stress, she says. Wow. And they it's the larger culture is playing out in family culture, work culture, school culture, and community culture, and they all share the same formula of shame, comparison, and disengagement. So, wholeheartedness, the cure to all this, is at its very core is vulnerability and worthiness, facing uncertainty, exposure, and emotional risks, and knowing that I am enough. That what, like you said, Glenn, this too shall pass. Whatever comes at me, I'll deal with it. You know, we've survived this. We survive anything, we'll move on. So she says the opposite of scarcity, the opposite of never enough isn't abundance or more than you could ever imagine. The opposite of scarcity is enough, or what I call wholeheartedness, that feeling that I am enough. Disengagement is something she talks about, which goes on to that in the next chapter a bit more, but does it feel as if no one is really paying attention or listening? Is everyone struggling to be seen and be heard? Well, that's setting the foundation of why we need to explore this topic of vulnerability, because of how much it's impacted, how much the negative impact of the cultural influences are having on our combined psyche, if you like, the way that we as a society look at things, and particularly being aware of how that's going to influence and shape the future minds of our children, because they are being exposed to this in a way that we never were as young people. Sure, there was always a war somewhere. There was always, you know, some sort of natural disaster going on somewhere. There was always, because that's what the news thrives on, isn't it? Is the change from the norm. It's not, the news media doesn't get very exciting if they're going, and over in America yesterday, everyone was happy. You know, that wouldn't make the news, would it? So in our community, Bill enjoyed his potatoes. No, it doesn't. That's not exciting enough to report on. It's got to be all the disastrous stuff and all the stories of woe and scarcity and terror and all that stuff. The war on terror. Oh my God.
One of the news stations, one of the media channels here years ago, I think it was Channel 7 maybe, used to finish off the news with like a good news story. At least you like it. Let's get all the death and destruction and pain out of the way. And by the way, yeah, you know, Bill down the road here, he's managed to get this done, and you know, he's a bit of a win and that sort of thing. But I don't know, it didn't last very long though.
It didn't last. I knew a lady who worked at the news station who tried to put that in, and her bosses wouldn't let her because, you know, the story of Mary's got a new rabbit or whatever it is just wasn't exciting enough. Compared to recession and plague and famine and war and all that stuff. Jane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to actually, Glenn, I was going to say the same thing. Although I do watch, there's a channel out of New York where once a week they, without fail, they have a segment on about kindness, and the story is about, you know, kind acts, like so and so did this, and what can we learn from that, and so on. So yeah, as much as we're going towards like self-isolating ourselves in, you know, especially young kids with gaming and on the phone, and, you know, not putting it down and having dinner at 5:30 and talking about how really was your day. I still think that there is a lot of good, and I think that the schools are starting to wake up a lot more to the fact that the kids are going in the wrong direction, and that we're going in a direction that we have to counter.
Yeah.
So
definitely a raised awareness to that generation now that's coming through. Another guy here who still is a school teacher, but he's getting less and less hours as a school teacher because he's set up a mindset and a mindfulness program for kids from like year 3, basically. but just bringing back good old laughs and fun and, you know, that sort of stuff into the classroom. You know, rather than kids wreaking havoc and on their phones all the time. It is starting to change. It's starting to shift. I think it's social media's done one thing, but it's raising awareness onto you know, people's opinions for whatever reason are being more widely spread and heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to pick up on something that us adults can work on too, and that is exploring the possibility that it's okay, because there's a lot of political debate going on, and particularly with America's just had their midterm elections. It's okay for people to have a different opinion to you and a different perspective on things, and that doesn't make them the enemy necessarily. You know, it's like underneath whatever those people are thinking that are running for politics, they are, we hope at least, trying to do the best that they can from their perspective of what they think is the right way to go. That doesn't make them the enemy. And in the old days, we seem to be able to accept the fact that the opposition, whoever they are, had a different way of looking at things, and that was okay. And then we lived in democracy, so if the majority of people think we should give it the go this way, that's fine, rather than turning it into basically a civil war, which is almost looming in almost every country, it seems these days. It's split down the middle. You're either this or you're that. You know, this either or situation is just crazy. It's getting out of control. So we're going to be going on to next week the exploring or debunking the vulnerability myths in chapter 2, and I think we'll get through chapter 3 as well, which would be understanding and combating shame. So my challenge for you all this week is to believe and go practice believing that you are good enough, you are worthy, and to debunk this myth of that you're not good enough or not worthy, because it is just a myth. It's just your little voice in your head saying, oh, I've got to look after myself, put this suit of armor on, I don't want to risk being vulnerable. So any last thoughts before we close off today, because I'm just aware of time, we have overrun slightly.
No, I think it's been great insights, and as I said to you yesterday in our meeting, just reading those first couple of chapters made me put myself out there, thinking, okay, I have to let go of being vulnerable, because you know, some good things can happen if you just put yourself out there and try different things. So yes,
You certainly have. That's brilliant, Fiona. Some of the things that you've taken on board. It's so true, because it's a lot of it is imagination. In our own mind, we fear, oh, the worst thing that could happen, and it's never as bad as what we've imagined. You know, you put yourself out there, even if you make a mistake or get something wrong, does it really matter? You know, if somebody thinks you're an idiot, does that really make any difference? You know, it's, at least you've had a go. Like it says, you're in the arena.
yes.
You're out there. Okay, thank you everybody for a tremendous meeting and all your input. It's been very, very powerful, and I've loved hearing what you've all got to say. Sorry, Stan couldn't jump in a little bit more. He's obviously dealing with family stuff there. But lovely to see all your faces, and we'll hopefully see you all next week. Same time.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone.
So there, guys. Have a good week.
Bye.